Volume 41. The Devil's Craftsman. Nazaric's king paced in his room, attended by only one single maid, Lupus Regina Beta. Out of all the battle maids, he had come to know her the best due to her extended services rendered during his short-lived time as Moman. The role was still there, a staff of humans reliably tended to his estate as one of the great lords. But he was often away on assignments for the crown, boosting Rena's reputation as well as his own by eliminating monsters before they could threaten the kingdom. The Adventurers Guild was suffering for his efforts, but the population didn't care. The truth was that his own summons were usually dispatching them, and Rena just gave him the credit. Most of the time when he was required to act in the kingdom, it was Pandora's actor that visited. Everything was neatly tied up. And yet he paced. He recalled the last discussion he had with Blue Rose. Pickings are slim now. It looks like if we want to continue to practice our trade we'll have to leave the kingdom soon, Lake Hughes said while the peasant maid poured another glass of wine. A shame really. Not to criticize you, Mr. Moman, Evil Eye exclaimed and waved her hand back and forth as fast as she could, briefly drawing away from him. Really, what you've been doing for what is left of the kingdom has been beyond wonderful. So many lives saved. But now our work is drying up, and not just ours, others too. Maybe we should start thinking about retirement? Gagran proposed and took another deep drink at the same moment as Lupu did. The pair's tendency to try to outdrink each other was a fixed feature of their associations now, and so nobody bothered to say anything. I know what you mean. But what a shame it is. Ainz replied as Moman, and his heart was sorely troubled. I finally understand those players who wanted only to explore Yggdrasil. Adventuring. It is marvelous. Marvelous beyond words. And it draws the strong, the ambitious. Creating resentment among those is a problem. He told himself then, and told himself again as he paced in his room. However, the truth, a truth he was well aware of still, was that he didn't want adventuring to die out. His solution to keeping Blue Rose in the kingdom at the time had been impulsive. If you're worried about the cost of living that you're accustomed to, stay in my estate. I'm seldomly here thanks to my work, and there is enough space here for you all to have whatever comforts you need. Did you just invite me to live with you, Mr. Moman? Evil Eye stammered, and Ainz cocked his head down toward the diminutive magic caster. We are comrades in the same profession, it's only natural we should help one another, isn't it? My status may have changed somewhat, but I am still an adventurer at heart. That much had been a total truth. It felt too right to him, to be out and about, far more comfortable than kingship. That encounter ended on a warm note, with the most powerful and respected adventurers in the kingdom being bound tighter to Moman, as both an adventurer and a great lord. Now back in Nazarick, he was still quite troubled by how it all went. Demiurge, predictably, praised it to the skies. Queen Rena has informed me of all that you've accomplished. We are all in awe of what you've done. Binding them dependent on yourself as their benefactor makes them easy to control. Fragments of the conversation were lost by Ain's own sense of confusion at the grandiose proclamations of the demon, and that was still only the smallest part of the trouble in his breast. He went to his desk where the little dagger lay, taken from among Hiketi's things. It was a rune-crafted item, not unlike the spear she used against the lizardman. I don't want powerful and ambitious people resenting me. Nazarick has no real direct need of adventurers, and if adventurers start fleeing as they lose their livelihoods, then they will carry that resentment with them. The upcoming trip to see the dwarves teased him. There lay a tantalizing possibility of an answer in there. Ainz stared down at the little dagger. It had only a single rune carved on it, a rune that, as he learned, meant ice. It inflicted cold damage, and experiments by Foresight had them appraise it as useful, which was praise enough. They are fanatics now. I wonder if that is something to do with adding them to the rosters. Will anyone I add to the roster and level up become a fanatic? It was a whole new line of questioning for which he had no answer again. Lena's own devotion was such that she seemed to enjoy the tale. A shudder came over him. He felt Lupus Regina's eyes on his back. As the first to recognize his transformation, she also spent the most time with him. His idiosyncrasies as a human again were taken in stride. He traced a finger back and forth along the blade, then turned and tossed it to her. She caught it by the handle with no real effort. Tell me, Lupus Regina, if you were a common human who aspired to be an adventurer, how would you respond to being given that weapon? She glanced down at the weapon. It wasn't badly made. Steel with an enchantment of any sort was expensive. She scratched behind her ear while her eyes focused on the weapon itself. A common human adventurer would be overjoyed to receive something like this, my lord. That is also my thought. As things are, driving the powerful and the ambitious away is a process that will only continue. But these dwarven crafts offer a chance at turning that around. Drawing adventurers and would-be adventurers to my kingdom rather than driving them away from it. My lord? Lupus Regina asked, a quizzical look on her face when she cocked her head, reminding him vaguely of a confused puppy for a moment and prompting a laugh to come from Irons that took several seconds to stop. He waved his hand away at her evident confusion, choosing instead to explain, we shall nationalize the Adventurers Guild. I can think of any number of uses for a militarily capable force that wishes to explore, plus I'd rather they go out there spreading my name than spreading dissent. The Dwarven runecraft will keep the costs low, and I was planning to see them anyway. Perhaps my thoughts of trade should be expanded beyond their original scope. Iron's words trailed off and his pacing, which had briefly paused to address Lupu, redoubled. Taking Demiurge might have been an accidental offer, but there is no better place to tell him than under a mountain. He is the weakest, but perhaps smartest guardian. Even before my enhancement I could have handled him. But still, doing so in an enclosed space is better for me. It filled his heart with a mix of pain at the prospect of having to fight one of the precious children of his friends, and excitement at planning out a potential fight against a powerful opponent. His parental instincts at war with his gamer inclinations, there was nothing he could do but move forward. Has he finished the handover to Albedo for integrating the ceded cities and ensuring the frogmen have what they need in order to rebuild? Imes asked, and Lupus Regina bowed her head. Forgive me, my lord, but I don't know. She answered in a little voice like she was guilty of forgetting something important at school. There's no need to apologize, you didn't know. Go ahead and find out. I should get my rest for now, Imes said, and the battle maid bowed before departing. As soon as he was alone, Imes went to the mirror and moved it over the Draconic Kingdom. The Beastmen's advance was once rapid, but it was now completely halted, though through no effort of the human kingdom, rather that the Beastmen had enough food. Ugly a scene as it was, he didn't watch for long. And as if the ghost of Touch Me stood by his side, he heard the whispered words. Helping the weak is common sense. He turned the mirror off. I will watch the Queen again instead. So much can be learned from that one. He reflected. Imes cast a spell of watchfulness and looked through the view that let him look at the Queen of the Draconic Kingdom. Seated on her throne, she did not so much as shiver. Her hand waved before her in a slow, graceful gesture as she spoke to her nobles. There will be no further retreat. The line will be drawn there. You will send either your wealth or yourselves to the front lines, and we will save our nation. The guards along the wall tensed up as she spoke. Even through the magical view, Imes could feel the electricity in the air, the energy and the way the woman presented herself as the picture of power. Marvelous. Utterly marvelous. Weeks of monitoring, practicing her gestures and tone of voice. How long before I can do so as flawlessly as she can? Imes asked himself and waved his hand the same way she did. When the moment passed, the Queen spoke again. Have we enough adventurers to help the army out of its bind? And what about the aid from the slain theocracy? Regrettably they are caught up in their war with the elves. All they can send the retired scriptures. The same as they send every year. A red silk-clad courtier near the throne replied. He was gaunt and worn, his face clean-shaven, but it was obvious the burden of his station was beating him down. It made the Queen stand out all the more in Imes' eyes because she appeared to bear it all marvelously better than the others. Her back was straight and makeup perfect. Her white dress hung down to her ankles, and the whole court hung on her silence as much as on her words. I see. What about reaching out to the new kingdoms that emerged? The Kingdom of Khani or the Kingdom of Nazarick? Both have had substantial military success. Particularly Nazarick. Queen Draudillan said with a hopeful glance at her aide. The Wolf Queen and Wolf King of Khani have offered caches of supplies in the form of potions. It appears that is their primary export, but they have yet to establish a formal adventurers guild and are still finding their feet as the Queen said it, and so haven't the means to send an army to our aid. Still, potions will be helpful. It is something. What about the Kingdom of Nazarick? The Queen followed up without missing a beat. I haven't heard anything from them. That is strange. Imes pondered that, but had his question answered a moment later. At the time, their king was away settling a border affair with the lake people, the lizardman and frogman, and so our delegation left empty-handed. The aide answered and Ainz could only sigh at that. As a matter of goodwill I should send something. Given what I have learned from watching her, I should offer something. Nazarick must always repay a debt, even if they don't know we have it. Ainz muttered as he watched the court play out in front of him. He snapped his fingers. Yes. I want to have the Adventurers Guild nationalized for my kingdom. I need to draw in talent. I know exactly what to do. His guildmaster blood was on fire with excitement as he found an answer he could actually easily solve. It was only the knock at the door which brought him up short. Volume 4 C2. Yes? Ainz asked, briefly worried that he jinxed the moment with his excitement. Lupus Regina spoke through the door. My lord, Lord Demiurge states that he is always ready to serve you. But that he requires 1 day more to complete the handoff to Albedo, if that pleases you. The door was, like the rest of the rooms of Nazarick, enchanted so that sound would not carry out, while a voice going in would only carry if there was a knock first. Convenient for privacy, which was an understatement, but still insecure. Ainz was glad he hadn't shouted with relief and happiness at his ability to solve a problem. Good, he shouted back, have Foresight and Lena's rock brews sent to me immediately. He felt his gut tighten for a moment. Make sure Shaltir knows to send Lena's dressed for battle and without her tail. My lord. Lupus Regina acknowledged and withdrew. When she was gone, Ainz thought of the other knights, once powerful figures in their own right. They were handily defeated by a much elevated and much better equipped Foresight, and yet they might still be useful. Then there were the bodies of the dead which hadn't immediately responded to the -7th tier spell to raise them as skeletons. They had to have been higher level than the low range intended by the spell he'd cast. Something might be made of them too. I thought about returning them to Jerkniv, but maybe something else instead. A guild needed members, a new organization especially required loyal persons, capable persons. I have too few from outside of Nazarick. Supplies are a problem, a lack of extra available talent is a problem. But loyalty was not a problem for those who were turned. A knock at the door resounded in 3 steady blows. Lord Ainz, your faithful have come at your calling. Robert Dyke. Ainz recognized the voice. Now a Templar of considerable power relative to the outside world, he endeared himself to other Nazarick denizens by insisting that Ainz was in fact a god. Ainz opened the door and found all 5 kneeling outside, not daring to even think of entering his chamber. I have an assignment. A mission of goodwill to a neighbor state. The Draconic Kingdom is in a fair amount of trouble with the advances of the Beastman Kingdom. The Beastmen don't seem like the sorts of neighbors who will respect boundaries or borders. Moreover, the Draconic Kingdom seems more open to working across racial lines. For that reason, you will travel to her kingdom and aid her in holding back the Beastmen. A token of goodwill from the Kingdom of Nazarick to our neighbors. My lord. They acknowledged with heads bowed. You will state that you are from our nationalized Adventurers Guild. He tried not to smile when the 5 of them immediately got little smiles of their own at his statement, and that I trust it will be no issue that I have non-humans in my employ. Lena's raised her hand and her head, and when Ainz acknowledged her with a glance she said, My lord. Pardon me. But you said non-humans. But should. Ainz stopped her, your late comrades. I will have them raised and turned. Another vampire and a pair of werewolves should make a flexible enough team. We'll just have to change your faces to ensure you aren't recognized, and equip you in materials of your own. Carry the order to Pandora's actor, Lupus Regina, and Shaltir to see it done. As my lord commands, Lena said and bowed her head again. Have you any other tasks for us while there, my lord? Hecarim asked. Just one thing. Spread word that the Kingdom of Nazarick will be nationalizing our Adventurers Guild, providing training and equipment for those who will serve the king with loyalty. Invite them to come to my kingdom, if they wish to become more than mere monster hunters. If they wish to become adventurers. He placed special emphasis on the final word and he could all but see the goosebumps rise on their skin. We hear and obey. With happiness, Arch said with reverence and a head that seemed somehow more deeply bowed than before. Then go, and see it done. He gave the order, and they stood as one with hands closed into fists still pressed over their hearts. They backed away several steps, and withdrew from his presence. Alone again, Ainz turned back to the matter at hand. The dwarves. What kind of people will they prove to be? He muttered and went over what few documents his subordinates had been able to gather. For over a century the dwarves had largely ceased to take an interest in the outside world. Instead they seemed only to care for their life under the mountain range and nothing more. But what he did find was more than a little interesting. Runecraft was once exceedingly popular and expensive, but two facts stood out above all else. Only dwarves can do it. And the oldest known references to runecraft predate the 6 great gods and the arrival of tier magic. That means this is more closely aligned to either wild magic or a kind of unique racial skill. The dwarves may be the most valuable ally I could make in this world for the foreseeable future. Excitement at such a tremendous success was hard to suppress, and alone as he was, he didn't bother to try. Ha! What a win! Cost-free enchantment limited only by time. How is it that every kingdom hasn't tried to monopolize this for themselves? He all but shouted, and then it hit him. He slammed the paper in his hands down and held his hand hard over it as if afraid it might blow away. Maybe they have. Perhaps that is why the dwarves have been so withdrawn for so long? He tried to recall his time as a salaryman and what it meant to deal with recalcitrant potential clients and customers. They would always be the toughest to win over. Okay, Suzuki Satoru. This might be the toughest sale of your life. But you can do this. He tried to tell himself that, but was briefly lost in all the ways it could go wrong, including darker imaginings. A scene from a very old movie came to mind, The Lord of the Rings, and the scene in which they sought to go under the mountain and found the dwarven hall dark and empty. The threats that lurked hot on the heels of the main characters. The prospect of shadows and torchlight, the prospect of danger and the unknown, it was all in his head. Don't be ridiculous. This will be a very casual meeting establishing trade ties and a chance to get a deeper look into Demiurge's loyalties. Nothing could possibly go wrong on something as simple as this. A guide. Yes. If I just show up by magic I will appear far too intimidating to trust. But if I go with someone familiar to them? The lizardmen knew something about this, as they have travelers perhaps. Perhaps they would know more. The prospect of greater knowledge and a friendly face to present to the dwarves on arrival was far too advantageous not to consider, and it solidified his decision. First, a trip to Greenclaw village. He decided, and releasing the pressure on the document, he turned and walked toward the door of his room, ready to leave. Volume 4C3. The lizardmen did not yet have someone permanently appointed to them beyond the occasional visit by Shultier. Demiurge occasionally visited once or twice to provide them proper supplies, but a more permanent fixture would be necessary at some point. Another thing to rectify, but not urgent. The lizardmen themselves seemed quite patient about it, content to use the paper provided with lists of supplies used, held, requested, and always sending along words of gratitude for the shipments of food that was supplied to them. Heinz thought that it might have been because of the lack of oppression, that their growing reverence and response to him suddenly emerging through the use of the gate spell was so uniform. They all at once knelt on sight and shouted for their chiefs. Zariasu, Crush, Shaziryu, Suku and Kyuku emerged from a single building as soon as Ain's name was announced. The many villagers had already prostrated themselves, forcing the chiefs to weave rapidly between their people to make it to the front. Once there, they lowered themselves immediately, kneeling in submission. Crush, at a glance, seemed larger than he recalled. They are eating better. Then all Ainz wanted to do was slap himself. She was obviously with child, though not very far along. Great one. How may we be of service to you? Zariasu asked, as he was in the middle, and slightly forward in line compared to the rest of them. It seemed they had come to defer in his direction for leadership. Ainz tried not to look too much around at the village. It still wasn't an impressive place. However, it was noteworthy that the stakes were taken up, that there were far more homes, the walls were expanded, and it appeared that there was the faint smell in the air from a smith's forge. Most especially he noticed the beginnings of a statue of himself. Where did they even find a rock that big? It was upright, and the beginnings of outstretched arms were evident. At a guess it was roughly a tenth of the way finished. Ainz chose to be brief. I intend to visit the dwarves and wish to know if anyone here has been to their kingdom who can act as a guide. Zariasu bowed his head. Forgive your servant, my lord. But I killed the one who knew the way. Please. Forgive me, but my travels took me among human lands. I know of only one traveler who ventured there, and he is gone. Crush immediately began to grovel at Ainz's feet. Please. My lord. My husband is going to be a father. It was a duel with Zhenbru. One Zhenbru himself began. The death was not planned, nor intended to defy any future will of yours. He acted in ignorance. Please grant clemency to your faithful servant and his family. Ainz paused, briefly dumbfounded. I will have to ask Demiurge just what he said to create this terrifying impression in their minds. Have no fear. What is done in ignorance may sting as much as malice, but it still isn't the same. I am a just lord. Ainz proclaimed and gave a noble wave over their heads in imitation of Queen Draudillan. As to Zhenbru's death, was he strong? Ainz asked. Very, my lord. Very, Zariasu said and reached over to help his wife rise to one knee again. She still shook with fear, but was at least quiet. Then he may survive his resurrection. Do you have his body? Ainz asked. Yes, my lord, we had it retrieved and kept it preserved, intending to bury it properly on his own ground again when we expanded that way again in a few years. Zarias's words flowed like water, smoothly, and without fear after taking Ain's words of just lordship as divine proclamation and absolute truth. Good, have it brought out here. But before that, congratulations on the pending birth of your child. When they are born, send word of their birth. We have a custom among my people of giving gifts to mark the occasion of someone's arrival in the world. I would like to provide something suitable for such a momentous occasion, Ain said. It was more offhanded, intended to ease the tension, but from the gasps among the lizardmen which followed he could only conclude that he enacted a new tradition. There are worse things than giving them a new pleasant tradition, I suppose. Ainz thought with a mental shrug. Yes, of course, my lord. What other things do you do? Zariasu asked, and Ainz looked away as memory took him from the present again. My friends and I, we would throw parties. Those who were dearest to us would come, give their gifts, sing songs, and play games, no matter how far apart we were. Those were times of great celebration for us. Birthdays were not just that a person was born, but rather that we were happy they were in our lives. And of course, there was cake, and ice cream. Ainz shook his head when he caught their lost expressions. Types of food, think nothing of it. I have things I must do, but it was good to remember those times, Ainz said with a tender reverence, cradling the memory as if it were a newborn babe. Yes. Forgive my needless diversion, my lord. We will bring his body immediately. Zariasu promised, and the chiefs rose together. The whole rest of the tribe remained prostrated around him. Silence, long and uncomfortable, took over the area until what must have been mere moments later passed and the chiefs emerged carrying the wrapped body of what must have been, in life, a truly impressive figure. The lizardmen in the way scooted to the side to allow the chiefs to pass, two abreast with Crush at the center rear. They held Zhenbru's body overhead until they came close to Ainz and laid the body of the fallen at the feet of their god to await his miracle. Ainz held the wand out, and within the sheer cloth, a sudden intake of breath could be heard, like a person who was drowning and out of air just shattered the surface of the water and inhaled all he could at once. Zhenbru's eyes opened wide to find himself staring through the cloth up at a red and white mask. I'm alive? He asked, his eyes darted around. Is this the Everlake? Did we all die? Did the frogmen kill everyone? Are you God? He asked, though he fumbled a few words, the confusion was clear. That depends on who you ask, Zhenbru, but you are not dead. The lizardmen were triumphant. Hecate and the frogmen were destroyed and have been relocated far, far away from here and will not trouble your people again. The lake belongs to the lizardmen now, and the monsters that plagued the swamps have been hunted down to the last. Ainz explained the impossible while Crush Lulu bent over him and ran her finger claw over the cloth and tore it asunder. Zhenbru emerged as it parted, coming out as if he were a butterfly from a cocoon. Then, it is heaven, he said with reverence. He stopped when he caught sight of Zariasu. You killed me, Zhenbru said with a long, quiet stare. Zariasu inclined his head. I did. Tension rose several notches. You fight good. Zhenbru praised his victorious rival. You protected my tribe. We bled together and won, thanks to his majesty, our king. Zariasu's reply was clear-eyed and he did not turn away from the look Zhenbru gave him. Good. Then the strongest rule as they should, and I am happy, Zhenbru said and turned to kneel before the masked Ainz. Then you are my king too, if you will have me, Zhenbru said without reservation. You're taking all this very well. Ainz remarked, looking half dumbfounded behind his mask at the ease with which the lizardman seemed to adapt. "If I am not dead and we're all alive, we must have won. If they credit you, then you must be strong, and I follow the strong. What I don't know, I will find out later." Zunbaru said it very matter-of-factly, and it was hard to doubt him. Maybe something about the simplicity of just follow the strong makes it easier to accept sudden changes. It was something for Ainz to think about at a later time. Instead, in the present, he got to the point. "You have been to the Dwarven Kingdom, haven't you?" Ainz asked. "When I was a traveler, yes, my king," Zunbaru answered. "They were very good to me, allowing me to stay with them when the temperatures grew too cold, and they guided me through safe paths away from the mountain when I left. So the dwarves of this world are clearly more altruistic than those in the game. That is good to know." Ainz pondered that and filed it away for later recall. "You will act as a guide and take me to them. I wish to open diplomatic and trade ties to my northern neighbors." Ainz gave the order, and Zunbaru swayed a little. "Forgive me. My body. I still feel weak. But at your command." Zunbaru stopped when Ainz laid a hand on his shoulder. "Rest for this day. I will retrieve you tomorrow and we will go then. There is a great deal of news for you to catch up on, and I'm sure your people would like to celebrate your return to life." Ainz replied to Zunbaru, who lowered his head deeply. "My lord is generous," Zunbaru mumbled. "What other lord deserves their title?" Ainz asked, and when he was gone, a throng of cheers in his name followed, and the lizardman began to throw an impromptu feast for Zunbaru's birthday.